Africa Prime, brought to you by Jamison Select Reserve.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Prime, the program that unravels the talent, finds big ideas and identifies the next generation of leaders that can move Africa forward. And we're certainly hoping that Reuel Khoza will be one of those. He's respected in South African business and is a proponent of new management culture based on inclusivity, Afrocentricity, and Ubuntu. He's also the author of the book Let Africa Lead and the co-author of The Power of Governance. Before we took the break, we were discussing about how we can make right the faults within the South African governance structures, both within the corporate as well as the political world. How do we get it right?
There are a number of challenges. As you said in initial conversation, leaders are not just born to the role, they're born then made, or they unmake themselves. Now, what do you do to make yourself a leader once born with the capability? You actually have to develop yourself. And once you are in a leadership role, how do you come to ensure that the leadership is effective as it should be? There are a number of things. The structures have got to be in place. Systems have got to be in place. But having done that, you must make sure that there are also certain superordinate goals that are actually greased to the system. Otherwise, the system actually grinds on itself and you can't go very, very far. Now, what might this be? These tend to be values. Now, what are some of these values that are germane to leadership in the corporate arena as well as in the in the government arena? These are integrity, probity, and probity is one of those values that not too many people actually give credence to. Probity is actually being honest but behaving in a manner that is actually practically beyond reproach. Now that's quite a tall order. Behaving in a manner that is ethical is also very, very important, because without ethics...
I was going to challenge you on that, because you actually raised the issue of what constitutes ethical leadership. So I was going to ask you to define it for us.
No, correct. I've already mentioned a few of those, integrity, honesty, probity, which is the one that I felt was quite important.
Sure.
And I am suggesting in the book that you could lead very, very effectively, for argument's sake, a leader like Hitler.
Sure.
A leader like even our own Zimbabwean president, Robert Mugabe, are very, very effective at actually rousing followership.
Right.
But because, in my observation, they are devoid of an ethical base that actually says, I am not going to do anything inimical to the welfare of my followership.
Right.
They are, when all is said and done, misleading as opposed to leading. Now, misleading is a form of leadership, but it's leading without an ethical base.
Let me ask you a difficult question. Are we providing fertile ground to grow the right kind of leadership across Africa?
It's a difficult question, right? But I think we are trying. Our efforts may not be yielding results like promptly. There are all sorts of institutes now that institutes of leadership. There's one whose patron is Bishop Tutu. There are others that were initiated by South Africans who are living abroad. There's the African Leadership Institute that was founded by somebody who used to be a leader of a pharmaceutical company here, and is currently led by one Peter Wilson. But it leads many, many people. There is a program that we established at the Nampak Business Foundation,
right,
that is also addressing those kinds of things. We have actually combined our efforts with those of an academic institution like Gibbs. Earlier on, we're working with vets.
Right.
So there is a sense in which efforts are being mounted And we have successfully persuaded emergent political leaders that, in fact, they would actually be much better leaders if, in addition to emerging within their parties, they actually took trouble to hone their skills, because they are, in fact, going to deal with complexity. They are going to deal with the phenomenon called globality and globalization. And without actually developing your skills and understanding the dynamics of all of these kinds of things, you are not likely to be able to lead effectively. And particularly now that there is a contest and a new scramble for Africa, unless you have the requisite sophistication to deal with complexity, you are not going to be able to rise to the challenge.
Is it enough?
A lot more could still be done.
By who?
By the likes of yourself, the likes of myself. I know that through the Nampak Business Foundation, we are doing the best that we could. And as I say, there are parallel and the complementary wisdom structures at universities. Also, those are independent institutes, as it were. Our Nampak Business Foundation is actually poised to do this continent-wide as opposed to merely in South Africa. And there are many universities in Nigeria, in Kenya, that have actually pledged to make common cause with us.
So that's on the political side. What about on the business?
That's both political.
It's both political as well as our business.
Yes.
Because I was going to ask about your work within the Institute of Directors of South Africa.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Within the Institute of the Directors in Southern Africa, we actually grappling perhaps a lot more directly with issues of governance. Now, I have argued in the past that governance is in fact leadership in practice. What I mean by that is that leadership actually manifests itself in a variety of ways. Sure. We have a whole section on ethics. We have a whole section on responsibility. We have a whole section on accountability. Now, all of these are issues germane to leadership, may it be in the private sector, may it be in the public sector, may it be even with NGOs.
Right.
All of these actually manifest as real challenges.
Yeah. How do you then brew this whole concoction together and build one strong attempt to ensure that we grow these structures consistently across both the political as well as the business strata?
We have attempted to marry what happens in the AU,
right,
which begot NEPAD,
right,
which in turn actually begot the Nampak Business Foundation. We try to marry that with what actually happens in a code like the King Code, which is in fact a code that was developed in the private sector. Yeah. But that code actually is pervasive. It says governance as it manifests itself in the economic arena, in the political arena, in the corporations, as well as in NGOs. The tenets that actually underlie that cut across the various sectors of society. And we argue that even politicians are leading in a political economy, as opposed to an economy or a polity.
Right.
There is an intermarriage between the two, and the complexity actually goes beyond that, but those are the basic tenets.
You anticipate my next question, because I was going to ask if there's a case to take the King Code as it stands and apply it to the political level.
Oh, very, very much so. In fact, the King Code has its genesis in the corporate arena.
Right.
But the Nampak Business Foundation actually has tapped into that, right, and said, well, what are some of the major challenges if we get accused as Africa for being corrupt? What are the elements or tenets of the King Code that actually seek to address that?
Yeah.
And then we come up with some of the systems that actually cut across and render themselves germane even to that particular instance.
How do we make the politicians listen?
Only last week we actually had a convention, the annual convention of the Institute of Directors, and the theme was courageous leadership conversations. We should actually have conversations across the artificial divides that actually divide us. Because leadership, when all is said and done, is leadership that should actually cut across and bridge the divides and cleavages that have compartmentalized us.
It reminds me of the story about the mice who had been terrorized by this cat and devised a plan to make sure that they would be able to silence this cat once and for all. And so someone said, let's put a bell around the cat. But then the crunch came. Who would bell the cat?
Who will bell the cat? I believe the courageous leadership that I spoke about at the opening of the Institute of Directors. I argued that if of all attributes, the most important attributes in leadership is in fact courage, because without courage, you won't even be able to have the courage of your conviction that actually say, go to those who masquerade as leadership and are in fact misleaders.
Absolutely.
If you have the courage, you'll actually cross the divide and say, in fact, there is something faulty or fundamentally misleading about your leadership. If you see kleptocracy, you'll be able to cry foul and then proceed to say, well, let's stop kleptocracy dead on its tracks, and then explain how you believe that should in fact
But I suppose that courage also has to come from the people, isn't it? I mean, we've seen it from Tunisia, we've seen it in Libya, we've seen it in Egypt, where people say enough is enough. We are going to be courageous here. And so that courageous leadership does not necessarily have to start with a small group of people.
Correct. Certainly. In fact, that gives credence to my argument that leadership does not reside in an individual or a few individuals. It's pervasive, and it can actually pop up at all manner of places and be manifest. And as a process, it gets to ignite that which needs to be done. And if it's a cry for democracy, and it finds a resonant response from the people, it could actually topple all manner of dictators.
Absolutely. And there's a wealth of information that I just couldn't get out of tonight's program with Dr. Khoza because time has just run out. But I must still tell you other information that was meant to be part of this conversation that unfortunately we didn't have time to talk about. Just to tell you a little bit about his education, Dr. Khoza's qualifications include a BA in honors in psychology, an MA in marketing, an NG doctorate in business, and an honorary degree, LLD honoris causa in law. You've been watching Africa Prime. I'm Godfrey Motizwa. Good evening.